So look at Anthony Ryder from South Lyon, Michigan, recently selected as the Lions 2020 Fan of the Year. He has a passion about sports broadcasting.
With the 112th selection in the 2021 NFL Draft, the Detroit Lions select Amon-Ra St. Brown, wide receiver, USC. One pride, baby! Yeah! What is going on, everybody? Welcome back to another Detroit Lions video. Now, there has been a lot of speculation around the Detroit Lions fandom about how the Detroit Lions should attack this offseason, whether they should be aggressive and go after a big name free agent or stick the course, draft their guys, and really build through the youth and depth of this football team. And the biggest name that's been floating around Detroit, and a team that has been very much rumored to be in the running to make a big move, is the Detroit Lions. And that big move would be considering bringing in a Rams corner, Jalen Ramsey, to the Detroit Lions. In turn, essentially trading likely their first-round pick in order to acquire the all-pro caliber corner, bringing him into Detroit for the next 2 to 3 seasons. So today, we're going to talk about it, go over his stats, go over his contract, go over really everything that would be involved in this trading scenario, talk about whether or not it would be a good idea for the Detroit Lions to bring in former all-pro cornerback Jalen Ramsey. So, getting right on into it, the Detroit Lions should try to bring in Jalen Ramsey to the team. Now, this article really just talks about how, they are a young football team. They are kind of in need of a really good football player. They're in need of, a Pro Bowl caliber guy, and Jalen Ramsey could be that player as he wants out of the Los Angeles Rams, or reportedly could want out of the Los Angeles Rams organization. Now, I think the first thing that you really have to consider when thinking about Jalen Ramsey is the contract implications, because yes, you're parting ways with a first round pick. That is something that is potentially very costly to you as a football team. The Lions have two, and likely they would give up the number 18 overall pick. That's really been the speculation of, okay, we'll give up pick number 18. We'll bring in Jalen Ramsey, an all-pro caliber corner, and we will, kind of say, okay, we're giving up on maybe a 10-year veteran for a 3 to 4 year veteran, right? We're giving up on a potential franchise piece for a potential game changer now and here. And I think that, really the big thing for this situation is how much space is Jalen Ramsey going to have to take up on your roster? Because if you're the Detroit Lions, you have a lot of players that you need to re-sign, right? And there's a lot of core foundational pieces that are currently unrestricted free agents and do need their contracts restructured, do need their contracts re-signed in order to stay with the football team. Now, we're talking about guys like Jamal Williams, who led the team in scrimmage touchdowns. We're talking about guys like John Kaminsky, Isaiah Buggs, Deshaun Elliott, Alex Anzalone, even potentially DJ Chark, all of whom are in for a decent pay raise this season. And with the Lions only having $15 million in cap space this offseason, Jalen Ramsey's $23 million cap hit over the next 3 years doesn't really seem like it would fit very well within the system the Detroit Lions are trying to build, right? Now, if those guys happen to be re-signed, right? If the Lions make the right cuts, if the Lions free up enough cap space and they are able to re-sign a lot of our core free agents, returning them to the Detroit Lions, and then they make a move for Jalen Ramsey, I don't think it would be a bad move necessarily. Now, would I like giving up a first-round pick? Would I like giving up a top 20 pick for a cornerback that is going into his age 29 season, where cornerbacks very, very often start to fall off in their ability and really just kind of start falling off physically in the NFL? That's typically that age 29 is where NFL players start to fall off, especially defensive backs. They go from being all-pro, Pro Bowl caliber guys to being liabilities in coverage over the next season. And it is a drastic change. It goes from all pro, Pro Bowl to liability in coverage very, very quickly. And I wouldn't want to risk a first round pick on a guy like that when this cornerback class is incredibly deep. When you could go out and get a Devon Witherspoon, a Joey Porter Jr., a Keely Ringo, a Cam Smith, and maybe not be guaranteed that NFL success, right? Jalen Ramsey's proven he's been in multiple systems. He's succeeded everywhere he's gone. He's very, very good at what he does in the NFL. And you're not guaranteed that in the draft, but you're also not guaranteed that Jalen Ramsey is going to continue to play at an all-pro level over the next 3 to 4 seasons. And if you're going to trade a first-round pick and pay a guy $25 million against the cap every single year for the next 3 seasons, you're going to want a guy that you know is going to be at a top level, you know is going to be at an all-pro. And just being at that age where cornerbacks typically drop off, it is a little bit concerning that you're going to pay him all this money. You're going to sacrifice a first round pick that you could potentially use on a franchise cornerstone cornerback and say, okay, we're going to gamble all this money. We're going to gamble away one of our first round picks that could go into getting a cornerback that plays longer than Jalen Ramsey and plays at an all pro level for 10, 15 years instead of 3 to 4. That is something you also have to consider. But I think the biggest knock and the biggest reason that a lot of people are against trading for Jalen Ramsey is, like I said, you wouldn't want to sacrifice your core players to bring in Jalen Ramsey, right? You wouldn't want to give up 5 or 6 core foundational pieces, 4 or 5 defensive starters to go get an all-pro cornerback. And even though Jalen Ramsey is a great corner, even though Jalen Ramsey is a very good player, it is a little bit concerning that you might have to sacrifice some of your core pieces, some of your Jamal Williams and your John Kaminsky's and your Alex Anzalonis in order to bring in Jalen Ramsey, because the Lions just don't have enough money to give big contracts to everybody. Now, looking at Jalen Ramsey's play by himself, he's been a very good cornerback. He's been a very good cornerstone piece to the Rams system over the last couple of years. And I think the narrative that Jalen Ramsey has fallen off, the narrative that Jalen Ramsey went from being the number 1 cornerback in the NFL to not playing very well at all, is really truly overblown quite significantly, right? If we look at his stats over the last couple of years, 2022 versus 2021, in 2021, Jalen Ramsey was a Pro Bowler. He was a first-team All-Pro. He played in 16 games, allowed 58 receptions at 98 targets, allowed 624 yards and 3 touchdowns. In 2022, Jalen Ramsey played an extra game, gave up 1 less completion and was targeted far less on the season, gave up 5 touchdowns in just about 30 more yards overall. That is not fallen off. And that is certainly not a, hey, we're going from all-pro, first-team all-pro, easy Pro Bowler, best cornerback in the NFL to not even in the top 5. That's kind of the narrative that the NFL has painted around Jalen Ramsey, and he really didn't show that big of a drastic fall-off. Yes, he allowed more yards. Yes, he allowed more touchdowns. Yes, he allowed a higher passer rating this year than he did last year, but he allowed 30 more yards, 1 less completion while being targeted significantly less, same amount of forced turnovers in 1 more game. So I don't think that the narrative that Jalen Ramsey has fallen off, or that Jalen Ramsey is really even truly coming off a down year, is that accurate, because I mean, look at the statistics. He really didn't have that big of a statistical drop-off. And yeah, you could look at it and say, oh, well, he gave up big plays to Diggs. He gave up big plays to, this player and that player. He might not have had good games. But at the end of the day, Jalen Ramsey on the season did not have a worse year in 2022 than he did in 2021. And I think that aspect of the trade is being slightly overblown, because a lot of people are saying, hey, this guy's coming off of a really down year, when in reality, he played just as well as he had the year prior when he was at his all-pro level, when he was a first-team all-pro, when he was a Pro Bowler, and he was considered the best cornerback and the best defensive back in the entirety of the NFL. So I think that narrative is a little bit overblown. Now, yes, the completion percentage went up, the yards for completion went up, the touchdowns allowed went up, the yards per target went up, the passer rating allowed went up. He did not have a better season. He did fall off a little bit, but it was not to the point where it goes from number 1 corner in the NFL, number 1 defensive back in the league, to not even in the top 5 not even in the top 10. So I think that that narrative is something to be monitored, but also something to say, okay, it's a little bit overblown, right? You're not necessarily in a situation where you're going to get a bad cornerback on day one, but how much is he going to regress next year? Is that completion percentage going to keep going up as it has over the last 3 seasons? Is the yards allowed going to keep going up? Is the touchdowns allowed going to keep going up? Is the yards per target and the quarterback rating going to keep rising in the 2023 season like it has over the past 3 seasons? Because in 2020, he was a lockdown corner. In 2020, he was the best cornerback in the NFL. And then in 2021, there was a big drop off. There was a big down year for Jalen Ramsey. And then the year after that, it got slightly worse. So as he continues to age, as he continues into his age 29, 30, and 31 season, is that trend going to continue? And is he going to keep giving up more yards, going to keep giving up more completions, going to keep giving up bigger plays, more touchdowns on the year, and a better quarterback passer rating when targeted? Those are things that are concerning as well. And even though he didn't necessarily have a horrible year this year, that doesn't mean he's not going to continue to get worse. It doesn't mean he's not going to continue to fall off a little bit. And as we've seen over the years with even Pro Bowl and all pros like Patrick Peterson, like Richard Sherman, and so many others throughout the years, that age 29 season is typically the mark where cornerbacks start to fall off, where cornerbacks start to really go, really fall, and really start to just not play at the same level that they were a few years prior. So if I'm the Detroit Lions and you're considering all of these factors, right? You're considering the history of the position, right? The fact that most cornerbacks fall off at the age 29, the fact that Jalen Ramsey for the last 3 years has consecutively gotten worse and worse and worse over the last 3 seasons, dating back to 2020 all the way to 2021, knowing that while he's getting worse, he's getting older and he's about to hit that wall where a majority of corners start to fall off a cliff. And the fact that you would have to pay Jalen Ramsey upwards of $27 million of your cap space over the next 3 years, right? 25, 26.7, and 22.7. That is a huge gamble and a huge sacrifice to bring in a guy that might break the norm, a guy that might continue to play well into his early 30s and late 20s. Most cornerbacks don't do it. And yes, Darius Slay has done it. There have been a few guys over the years that continue to play at a high level, even into their early to mid 30s. But it is a rarity. There are far more examples of all pro cornerbacks being cut at 30 years old and being released and, having to take cuts and all these different things than there are all pro cornerbacks that are 30 years or older. If I were the Detroit Lions, I would draft a cornerback, whether it be at 6 or whether it be at 18. This cornerback class is incredibly deep and incredibly talented. And instead of getting a guy and paying him 23, 25, 26, $23 million of your cap, a large percentage of your cap, right? 10, 11% every single year, and hoping he remains at a top level, why not go out and get a Joey Porter who has all the skill set and has all the tools to be an all-pro cornerback for the next decade? Why not go get a Cam Smith who looks very similar to a lot of other SC corners that have come out over the last couple of years? Why not go get Keely Ringo or Devon Witherspoon and go get your boundary cornerback for the future? Keep building the way you've been building instead of sacrificing your future and potentially sacrificing a lot of your core defensive members in order to make a splash in the offseason. To me, it doesn't make a lot of sense. It doesn't make a lot of sense financially. It doesn't make a lot of sense through the draft capital wise. It doesn't make a lot of sense knowing that you're going to have to sacrifice some of these core members and to take a chance that Jalen Ramsey breaks the norm, to take a chance that Jalen Ramsey doesn't continue this trend of going down, that doesn't continue this trend of getting worse every single year over and over and over. So for me, I would really hope the Lions don't make this trade. Now, if it's a trade and it's, say, a 2nd and a 6th, or a 3rd and a 5th, similar to what we got in return for Darius Slay, then I think the contract is a little bit different. If you're giving up day 2 and day 3 picks for Jalen Ramsey, then I think there's a conversation to be had, but the situation has to be incredibly specific. If I were the Detroit Lions, I would focus internally. I would try to re-sign Jamal Williams and Alex Anzalone and John Kaminsky and Isaiah Buggs, and if at a possibility, potentially DJ Chark and Deshaun Elliott. Then I would address the situation. Do we have the cap space? Do we have the picks, right? If all those guys are re-signed and you say, okay, we still have the cap space, let's call for about Jalen Ramsey, right? Oh, it's an 18th overall pick. That's a little high. But if it's a third and a fifth, like what we gave up for Slay, or if it's even a second and a sixth, I think then the conversation could be had. Just like every player, Jalen Ramsey has a price. And just like every player, Jalen Ramsey has a cost where he would be a good value versus a bad value, where the gamble would be more risk than reward or more reward than risk. At this point, trading a first-round pick for a 29-year-old corner who's going to cost you $25 and $26 million against the cap over the next 2 seasons to gamble that he is going to continue to play at an all-pro level, break the norms over the last 3 years of his own career, and break the norms of DBs across history, I think is a gamble the Lions just should not make. So, with all that being said, that's all I got for you guys today. Let me know down in the comments below. Would you trade for Jalen Ramsey? Would you want the Lions to make this big blockbuster splashy move in free agency? Or do you want them to stay the course, keep drafting, keep developing, and really just keep building the way they've been building? Be very curious what you guys think. But with all that being said, that's all I got for you guys today. Thank you all so very much for watching. And until next time, and as always, go Lions.